Hello and welcome to Maverick Dreamers and Thinkers. I'm Chloe Cho. As the title of our podcast suggests, the goal is to put the spotlight on people who think differently and help us open our minds. Our guest today is a maverick in every way who breaks boundaries and barriers as our story takes us to Abu Dhabi of the United Arab Emirates. Meet Miray Zaki, a beautiful blonde Coptic Christian woman from Egypt, yet she's barely lived in her native country. Having attended international schools in the United Arab Emirates, followed by university and grad school in the United States, before working in London and other cities, she's a true citizen of the world. A little more than a year ago, when she was residing in Chicago, she received a call from the UAE's rulers to take on the very prestigious and honorable job of managing the billion-dollar endowment arm of Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan Foundation, which was set up in 1992 by the founding father of the United Arab Emirates. Why would the UAE offer the highly sought-after chief investment officer job to a woman, a non-Muslim, in fact a Christian, and a non-Emirati? Do bear in mind that while the UAE draws large numbers of expats to its capital Abu Dhabi and its business hub Dubai, conservative Muslim traditions still prevail. For example, Emirati women must receive permission from a male guardian if she wants to remarry, as according to Sharia law. Tell us a little bit about you. You are the Chief Investment Officer of the UAE's Zayed Foundation, which was founded by the Sheikh, the man who literally founded the country. How did you get into that prominent position?
I was very fortunate. I guess also luck favors the prepared, but I wasn't really prepared for that. I was born in the United Arab Emirates to Egyptian Coptic Christian parents who were also permanent residents in the United States. And so I partially grew up in that country. Fast forward a few decades, I was in the U.S. working there after finishing my degree at the University of Chicago's Graduate School of Business at the time. It's now called the Booth School of Business, my MBA. And the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority headhunted me from there in 2008. And so it was the perfect timing because I joined a deep-pocketed investor just before the storm hit in the financial markets. And so it was a fantastic learning curve, joining them and being able to deploy billions of dollars when the whole world was for sale. But I was there from 2008 to 2018, and I was able to oversee investments in, $15+ billion across multiple asset classes in private equity initially, and then in hedge funds, and then global special situations. So I wore 3 roles at the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. And then I left them in 2018 because I wanted to start my own private equity-like fund to invest in a strategy that I've been cultivating, if you will, and honing over the course of the prior 10 years. And that track record is 53 deals, 34 exits, and 30% IRR, predominantly investing in North America and Europe with about 20-30% buffer to invest opportunistically elsewhere. So here I was, like in Europe and US, trying to raise my fund, and I get a call back from Abu Dhabi. Hey, Miray, can you put your plans to raise that fund on hold for a little while because we need you to come back and be the head of investments or the chief investment officer of this endowment. We've known you for the prior 10 years, given some personnel overlap between people who worked at the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority and the Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan Foundation. Senior management who are prominent tend to rotate a lot. I found it to be not only an opportunity for me to give back to the country, but also a privilege and an honor to be selected from amongst thousands of people to lead the foundation forward in a way that would be hopefully more progressive and international and globally diverse.
Outside of the Middle East, people tend to think that, yes, the Middle East is changing, but there are a lot of connotations, misperceptions stemming from what happened after Arab Spring. Things are not really moving. Things are really archaic, old school, a little bit stuffy. They are very biased against women. But here you are, a beautiful blonde woman, youthful, single. You're not even an Emirati. The fact that you're even Christian It says so many things.
It does, and thank you for the kind compliments, but the United Arab Emirates has always been a beacon of transformation in the Middle East. It's always been extremely progressive and tolerant. Actually, 2019 is the year of tolerance. In the UAE, we've had women ministers since, I think, before 2004. I think maybe it was 2002, I don't remember, but around that time frame. So a good 15 plus years ago or so. In Dubai, we've had a very successful woman who ran the media city for Dubai, which is, again, very, outward looking. And you can imagine in media, you're exposed to people from all walks of life. And so as a woman being trusted with that role, and not just trusted, but also empowered, is remarkable. By background as well, I'm Egyptian, so we're fighters. The country has survived, 7,000 plus years. It's one of the oldest, if not the oldest civilization in the world. And Egypt's gone through Arab Spring, you mentioned that. And in fact, not one revolution, but two revolutions within a couple of years. And it was about time for change.
You're overseeing about $1 billion, right? It's been there since the inception, which is around 1992. Don't the decisions need to be halal, but you're Christian? So how does that work? The Muslim world is all about what is halal, what is not halal.
In Islam, Muslims do seek halal food, halal investments, halal pretty much everything. And that's respectful because it's part of their religious beliefs and practices. However, the moderate Muslims, the tolerant Muslims, don't impose that on others.
Are the sheikhs, now your bosses, the big bosses, they are moderate?
Absolutely. Otherwise, they wouldn't have hired me. The UAE is extremely moderate. I'll take you to the religious center where you have St. Joseph's Catholic School with a Catholic church in it, right next to St. Anthony's Coptic Orthodox Church, which is a church I go to. And right opposite, Jesus, the son of Maryam Mosque, which was renamed into that from the predecessor name, which was Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed's mosque. So Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed is the crown prince of the United Arab Emirates. His father allowed for churches to exist in the UAE for decades. But also, he himself gave up his name from his mosque to be converted to Mary, the mother of Jesus. So the Mosque of Mary, the mother of Jesus, is right next to the churches, which is quite remarkable.
You're Western educated. You spent time in the U.S., time in London, surely a global citizen. Have you ever just thought of making it easy? If you simply work in London or New York, Hong Kong or Singapore, even for that matter, life is pretty easy in a sense because you don't have to think about all these sensitivities that could emanate in that world.
You're absolutely right, but I don't think any place in the world comes without its own set of challenges. And the United States has always been a meritocracy where people from all over the world can thrive. The Middle East, I think, is struggling to find its way, but it's getting there. It really is getting there. And if I, as a Middle Eastern origin person, don't put in my own 2 cents to try to propagate that change or propel the countries forward, how honest or patriotic or genuine am I, really? Living and working in the Middle East, you actually feel a lot more pressure, and discrimination is a big word, but allow me to use it in a loose form, from some of the middle-aged Western men who grew up on Wall Street, especially in finance, at a time in the 70s and 80s where women were not prevalent.
It's a completely different culture.
And that's the mindset, unfortunately, that they come with to the Middle East and try to impose on the workplaces. And so a person at one of my predecessor roles, without mentioning who or what exactly happened, but the person who literally stopped my progression was a middle-aged white American man from New York City. And it's unfortunate because it's not the Arab, it's not the Sheikh, it's not the Muslim Middle Eastern man who did that. And I'd never actually experienced this sort of discrimination from the West, but it's actually imported into the Middle East. Because to be very honest with you, if that person was, or if these particular people were successful in the US, why would they come to the Middle East? To be very, very honest, where you still have to pay taxes, your upside is still capped because the Middle Eastern mentality in terms of pay is very different than the US. You don't eat what you kill.
You have been going on a disruptive journey, to say the least. You changed 40% of the book. What you've achieved in the past year is, in fact, something that is unheard of in the world of finance, in the world of CIOs. You've changed the book by 40%, and that takes at least 5 to 10 years. So what was really happening in your mind? What were some of the problems?
When I joined, it was an honor and a privilege, but it was also part of me giving back to the country. So
why is giving back so important to you? At the end of the day, you're Egyptian.
But I was born and partially raised there. Someone asked me that question when I lived in the US. Why do you love the UAE so much when you hold an Egyptian passport? If they respected you so much, or if they liked you so much, or even half of what you feel towards them, they should have given you a passport. And at that point in time, it didn't take me more than a second to respond to that person saying, in all honesty, patriotism and loyalty towards anything or anyone is in your blood when you're born, before it's printed on a piece of paper as a passport. You feel loyalty towards your parents before you really understand what parenthood really is. So His Highness Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan was actually like a father figure to everyone in the United Arab Emirates as we were growing up there. He wasn't just the president of the country. He was truly the father of the nation. And we all felt that growing up. And so I can't deny this feeling just because I don't have a passport from them.
Getting back to the book,
yes.
40% of changes in just 1 year and 3 months. What were some of the problems that you saw?
It is important to segregate between the philanthropic arm of any institution and the for-profit arm of that institution. Because the mentality, the incentives, the mission of these two portions of that institution are very different. The philanthropic part, you're supposed to impact as many lives or improve the quality of a life of a person and so on and so forth. Whereas on the endowment management side, what you're doing is really for profit. You need to be able to achieve proper risk-adjusted return that will enable the cost center or the philanthropic part of the institution to be able to continue to do its great work for the foreseeable future. But again, credit doesn't come just to me because frankly, the person who hired me, His Excellency the Director General, saw that in me, but also saw that in what needed to happen at the endowments in order to shake it up a little bit. So that's, I think, point number one. Point number two is a lot of endowments globally tend to be very risk averse. And through their risk aversion, to try to protect capital as much as possible, they tend to underinvest in asset classes that are potentially more lucrative on a risk-adjusted return basis and overinvest in asset classes that are potentially less lucrative out of just their focus, or overzealousness, if you will, on protecting downside. So that's one school of thought that I tend not to subscribe to. Another school of thought, which I'm an advocator of, is more of the Yale endowment.
Yeah, they've done a lot of smart investments.
They're one of the best performing endowments in the world. Yes. Kudos to the teams that have managed that endowment over the years. They've managed a globally diversified portfolio, but have not shied away from investing in liquids, from investing more in the asset classes that are perceived to be more risky. The reason I say perceived to be more risky is because through illiquidity, you do have a little bit of inherent risk, additional risk. But everything should be measured on a risk-adjusted return basis. And so whether you're investing public equities or fixed income or private equity or venture capital or hedge funds or CTAs or whatnot, one needs to understand the level of risk that they're taking by investing in each and every one of those asset classes. And risk is not volatility.
The foundation, it started with $1 billion, but because of this overly zealous, risk-averse attitude, they got so heavily into real estate, and the local real estate market completely crashed. And then that caused problems. So how did you fix that?
It's hard to fix the history, right? You can't really do much about what happened in the past, and that's known. What you can do is really try to improve as much as possible what happens in the future. I inherited a portfolio that is globally diversified. So the first step is to go through an exercise that the endowment's been going through anyways every few years, which is a strategic asset allocation revision. And so we went through that exercise with our investment committee and internal systems and processes, if you will. And the investment committee also saw that the portfolio needed a little bit more juice. Also aligning the endowment's return targets with the expense ratio of the foundation was critical from an asset liability matching exercise. So this exercise that we went through is not just critical, it's imperative for us to be able to do anything in terms of changes to the book, cleaning up some of the less appealing fund managers that are in your portfolio. And the term is firing them. You fire them, or you withdraw your capital, or you redeem, and hiring others that are potentially more interesting.
The sleek coastline of Abu Dhabi belies the slump the local real estate market suffered as residential property prices crashed at the height of the global financial crisis in 2008 in one of the world's worst housing crises. Prices have halved and continue to slip for luxury units at Abu Dhabi's lavish marina, as well as those on the man-made islands off the coast of neighboring city Dubai, and even deluxe units inside the world's tallest tower, Burj Khalifa. As subdued oil prices, oversupply of luxury housing keep a lid on any price gains, this explains why the Zayed Foundation was eager to stir up change in its investment direction, given that 40% of its book was dominated by real estate investments. As a result of this restructuring exercise, you also got the foundation, the fund, to get into some private markets, i.e. private equity, and basically juicing things up and being a little bit more disruptive as the local real estate market was trying to recover from that big blow. But getting into private markets, that's kind of a tough balancing act. You're supposed to be a foundation, the charitable giving, and yet private equity has this connotation of being sharks, turn companies around, cut costs, get out. There's sort of like an imaging or messaging issue here. How do you overcome that?
Luckily, the foundation was already invested in private equity before I joined them. I sort of was able to help them see the benefits of investing a little bit more in that space and a little bit more in the venture capital growth part of the spectrum, not just in later stage buyouts or secondaries. What we do is manager selection for the most part. The fund managers then proceed and do whatever they need to do to extract value from businesses. I read a research paper the other day analyzing how private equity-backed companies have, by and large, outperformed non-private equity-backed companies, and not just outperformed from a shareholder's value, but also from delivering value to consumers and also in aggregate over the long term, not over the short term, better employee retention rates. Because obviously in the short term, you kind of have to shuffle that. If you're buying a company and merging it with something else, you will have loss of jobs initially. But over the long term, you're able to hopefully retain better talent for longer. And so thankfully at the endowment, and frankly, most majority of endowments that invest in funds as opposed to investing directly are shielded from that immediate level of potential backfire.
Do you try to stay away from deals that get highly publicized? For example, Warren Buffett and 3G Capital that sort of got into this hot soup. And then now there's this big hoo-ha. You can get into a lot of celebrity drama, especially as Carlyle gets into this deal that involved Taylor Swift's original recordings. So this goes to show that private equity is really in your face nowadays and in almost every pocket of industry that you can think of. So as an endowment fund, as a foundation, do you shy away from these highly publicized deals? What sort of private equity deals do you look out for?
So we do shy away from the limelight. We don't like to, and that's not just the endowment or the foundation for that matter. That's by and large United Arab Emirates entities in general. They shy away from the limelight. Of course, I can't speak to all entities in the UAE, but by and large, it's more of a cultural thing.
What kind of deals, private equity deals, do you tend to go for? Are they medium size?
One needs to be as diverse as possible because you can't time markets and you can't time sectors. However, you can have general themes implemented throughout the book. So as I mentioned, we're invested 100% in funds. And so we're technically investing in fund managers to be able to invest on our behalf, if you will. So the decision-making on the actual deals on a day-to-day basis is handled by fund managers. If you look at statistical research, if you will, statistically significant research, you're going to see that returns have actually been made more consistently in the mid-market than in the large cap and mega cap. And so if I'm going to be an educated investor, I need to be able to make investments in that subsegment of the market as opposed to the mega and large cap.
There's a lot of concern as to whether there's a lot of froth, especially as the world is awash with capital, and even family offices, endowment funds, foundations, national pension funds, they come charging into this market. The juicy deals are getting fewer and fewer. What's your assessment of the current situation?
Chloe, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of capital out there, and Back in 2007 and 8, there was about $1 trillion of dry powder, i.e. capital that's allocated towards private equity that is waiting to enter the market or to be deployed in the market. That number today is $2 trillion. The frothiness exists everywhere. The valuations are at historical highs, if you will. But is it going to be historical high next year as well? Or are we going to see a downturn next year? No one really knows. So I think what's important for us to sort of appreciate in markets is that markets turn all the time and change all the time. Secondly, if you're a disciplined investor, at entry throughout the management of a deal or a company and through exit, that's when you can weather storms. But sort of riding the waves up and down is a recipe for disaster. So let me translate that into bring it down to private equity. So if I'm a private equity investor and I'm buying things at 15 times EBITDA today, just because the markets are marking it 15 times EBITDA, and then in hopes that next year it will be 17 times EBITDA, or the year after it will be 17 times EBITDA, and I can sell it then, and hopefully EBITDA would have increased by 10, maybe 15%. And so I would have gained money through multiple expansion and through margin expansion. And then hopefully as well, the markets don't crash. And so I'm able to get easy and cheap debt. And so in which case I'm making money as well through debt repayment.
EBITDA is in short for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and is a widely followed measure of profit. In the deep seas of cutthroat finance, private equity deals are riding high on a wave of cheap debt, pushing buyout values ever higher. Choice deals are becoming scarce as endowments, foundations, and family offices join the chase for returns in private markets, already crowded by growing numbers of private equity firms. As odd as it may sound, foundations endowed with $1 billion actually become small fish up against retirement funds, national pension funds, or even sovereign wealth funds armed with hundreds of billions of dollars in increasingly crowded waters. So when you get into these funds that invest on your behalf into private equity deals, what sort of time frame are they looking at? Are they looking at like a 5-year exit, 10-year exit, or even shorter?
So typically private equity funds, as you know, are 10 years long with a +1 or +2 on either side of the investment period or divestment period. And so typically funds tend to live for a good 12 to 14 years. That normally outlives any investment professional at any institution from a limited partner perspective. Average holding periods have actually been increased. Typical average holding period in the 2004, 5, 6 period for investments that have happened then have been around the 3 to 4 years time period. Period between 2015, 16, 17 also experienced a lot of fast-moving money in and out of deals where, again, holding periods have shrunk because markets have been very flamboyant. Nowadays, I think it's becoming a little bit more difficult, especially with the volatility in markets in Q4 of last year and the ensuing question marks about what's going to happen from a geopolitical perspective in the Middle East, China-America tensions, and Hong Kong and everything else. So markets are a little bit anxious about what's going on in U.S. elections and all that good stuff. With that said, if you look at public markets, last time I checked, this S&P was up 25% year to date.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So if you were just invested in public markets this year, without sort of trying to trade or time the market or whatever, you would have been up 25%.
I guess it's too late to head into the party now, right?
Where do you put your money?
I guess the proponents who believe that there is only one place to be, and that is private equity, their argument would be that since debt is cheap, right? We're in a low rate environment, period. So I guess their excuse is that this rally can only have legs.
Private equity is a very broad asset class or asset grouping, if you will. What you have under private equity is, for example, the early stage. You call that venture. Typically, that is unlevered. Then you have late stage venture, which is also typically unlevered. Then you have growth capital, which is also typically unlevered, where investors come into companies and invest in the equity without unnecessarily or perhaps necessarily leveraging up the companies. Then you get the buyouts. That's where it gets a little bit more leverage orientated. In that sort of sub-strategy, what you're doing is really buying a company company through its credit and sort of pushing it through bankruptcy and then taking over, typically adding a little bit more leverage into the equation in order to be able to take it out of bankruptcy. It's called debtor in possession. Whilst I agree with you that debt is so cheap and it's almost free money, so why don't I take advantage of it? Access to debt is not as easy. So unfortunately, the people who are able to access such cheap debt are the mega and large cap fund managers who have had billion-plus-dollar relationships with Wall Street. And so they're able to command very favorable leverage terms. The mid-market in general doesn't typically have the same sort of relationship with Wall Street from a dollar and paying perspective, from a clientele perspective.
So your foundation, the investments that you make, they're not levered. The funds that get into them, they're not really looking for high leveraged buyouts.
We typically like the mid-market, which means that you're inherently expecting less leverage in your companies, but the choice is with our fund managers.
You've been with the foundation a little over a year, 1 year and 3 months. You have this ambition to create your own company, to create your own fund. That's been put on ice.
But I'm going back to it. Yes, absolutely.
When? Do you have a timeline?
Yes, beginning of 2020, as in around the corner. So I'm looking to launch my fund within a few weeks.
When do you have time? You travel around the world. You work, I think, at least 20 hours a day. At least 20 hours a day. You're like a super robot.
No, I'm just one of those very fortunate women who are able to multitask. So,
do you have a personal life?
I do, actually. I do. My parents, a lot, they travel between the US and the Middle East and London, which is where my brother lives. I have a lot of friends.
Do you date? Do you have time to date?
I do date, yes.
How can they possibly fit in your 24-hour schedule?
I'll tell you about the people I don't fit with. People who, basically, when guys are more controlling and want you to be there when they blink. Yeah, I don't fit with those at all.
You're a real alpha. I mean, you're like the supremo alpha. Two alphas don't gel well together. I learned that from my interview with a dating guru.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Logic here that I learned from a dating guru, the lady who runs Asia's first and largest matchmaking service, is that a lot of super successful women, they present themselves as an alpha and go in, on these dates, treating them like debates. What are you? Are you like a super alpha from the inside and the outside, but an alpha that actually has a beta inside, or a beta that is in disguise as an alpha?
I'm confused. Yeah. Let me put it this way. If this was a mathematical equation or a finance-related equation, I'll be able to untangle it. But since it's a relationship and heart-related equation, I can't untangle that, unfortunately. But let me sort of tell you a little bit. I don't believe women should disguise themselves. I don't believe that women should downgrade their mental or intellectual abilities just to attract a partner. So I was engaged over 10 years ago. And this guy was absolutely awesome, truly loved him and whatnot, and he loved me as well. And whilst I feel very weird disclosing private stuff, but I'll tell you because you're a friend, Chloe. And I'll just ignore the fact that there are more people potentially listening to this later on. So, I was never overbearing or empowering, that I would never sort of judge who he would go out with from a friend's perspective or how long he would spend with his friends and whatnot, which actually turned out to be something that his wife afterwards did. And so we parted ways. He got married sometime later, and his wife truly ostracized him from his friends. And so whilst she appeared as a calmer beta, inherently in her, she was not just an alpha, but an overbearing alpha. Whilst I am an alpha, I don't believe I'm a beta at all, but I'm an alpha who's not overbearing. I'm extremely easygoing in spite of the fact that I am an alpha. I don't know if that makes any sense.
You're like a easygoing alpha, an easygoing alpha. Would you look for Middle Eastern men or Middle Eastern men who are Western educated, or just anybody and everybody with an open mind, super duper educated, intelligent, cosmopolitan, globe-trotting, intelligent, handsome man?
I think it's the latter rather than the former. I don't like to box things, right? So, because let's put it this way. If I had boxed my career, I would have never ended up where I am today. So I like to keep an open mind about everything, intellectual and mental stimulation is clearly very important to me. Compatibility is extremely important. Second is I'm Orthodox Christian, so my partner has to be Christian. That I want to have a household that is that prays together, goes and practices whatever it is what we practice together, that fasts together, whatever it is, So it's one spirit, one essence, if you will, in God's presence. So I actually gel very well with Europeans because by and large, we have very similar cultural principles.
How is the dating scene in a place like Abu Dhabi?
Abu Dhabi is a great city, but the United Arab Emirates, by and large, has a population of over 80% foreigners and 15 to 20% locals. And so dating scene seems to be, it's actually very difficult in the Middle East. And the reason it is particularly so in the United Arab Emirates is because it's extremely transient.
It's tough to build relationships.
Makes it very difficult to build long-term relationships. And frankly, in this day and age where people are connected on their cell phones, it becomes actually more difficult for people to spend time with each other. Of course. And so back when I was hearing stories from my grandparents, they would tell me that people would travel for months and then write letters to one another.
So romantic. Romeo used to walk up towards the window of Juliet. And I mean, those days are finished. You swipe right, you swipe left.
And so people were actually spending effort and time and a lot of money back then to be able to reconnect with their loved ones. Nowadays, if there's any effort involved beyond clicking a button, it's considered overbearing.
Where do you think you'll launch your new fund? Will you continue to be based in Abu Dhabi?
The geographies of our investments, if you will, are to be in the US and Europe, broadly speaking, with sort of a window left for opportunistic investments elsewhere, call it 20 or so percent. By elsewhere, I do mean Middle East or perhaps somewhere else, maybe Asia. My preference would be to have a location in the Middle East, since I've been anyways investing in the strategy for the past 11 years being based out of Abu Dhabi. And so assuming we have support from the government or support from local investors and anchor investments from the United Arab Emirates, we'd like to, and we would gladly have offices in the UAE.
Does the foundation know that you're going to leave?
Yes.
What did they say?
They wish me all the best. At the end of the day, I think I served my purpose in joining them. I joined to do a few things, and I promised them I'll deliver as much as I can possibly deliver. I told them I want to be here for a year, and they were very honorable, and they sort of appreciated that. And so it's been over a year, and I really want to get back to doing what I want to do.
All right. I wish you the best, the very best of luck. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Chloe. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
A woman on a mission to disrupt and stamp her mark in the world of finance, Miray is embarking on a new journey as CIO of Dismatrix Group, an innovative private equity and venture capital firm that focuses on sustainability and vegan investments. As Miray has the world in her sights, she's fully aware of the possibilities out there, just as her name suggests. The lover of God in hieroglyphics or Old Egyptian, a miracle as in Miray in Old French, the moon in Turkish, the planet in Persian, and the future in Korean and Japanese. Hope you enjoyed this unique perspective from Miray Zaki. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do subscribe and give us a quick review. If you get a chance, do reach out to me via social media and share what you think about Maverick Dreamers and Thinkers. Stay tuned for another fascinating episode next week. To all the great dreamers out there, I'm Chloe Cho. Take care.